and welcome back to the Dreamy Storytellers. I'm Bella. Let's continue the adventure that the Gaskitt family is on. As I read to you, The Man Who Wore All His Clothes, Part 2. The robber opened the door of the bus and jumped in. Gus and Gloria were sitting on the front seat with their swimming bags. Mr. Blotter stood up in the gangway. "Who are you?" he said. "Mind your own business," growled the man. And to the driver, he said, "Step on it." Mr. Gaskitt was still driving along. Up ahead, he thought he could see Mrs. Gaskitt's taxi. Mrs. Gaskitt was running after the bus. She thought she could see Gus and Gloria. Meanwhile, Mr. Blotter was asking, "What is all this? What is going on?" All the children were telling him, "It's a hijack, sir! A kidnapping! Ransom! No, it ain't, it's a joke! A trick! It's pulling our legs!" Now the robber took charge. From his pocket he pulled a gun. Well, a toy gun actually. The one he'd used in the bank. "That ain't real," yelled the children. "I've got one of them. It's plastic." "Silence," growled the robber. "Plastic kids." And he said, "Fingers on lips, hands on heads." He was old-fashioned too. Then to Mr. Blotter he said, "And you." And to the driver, "Drive." The chase began. The bus drove down the street. Mrs. Gaskitt, in her taxi, chased after it. Mr. Gaskitt, in his car, chased after her. The police chased after him. And the TV news reporter, with her TV cameraman and her TV van, chased after them. Meanwhile, Horace was at his friend's house watching TV. It was a cat food ad for crunchy mice, Horace's favourite food. Suddenly a voice said, "We interrupted this cat food ad for crunchy mice with a live coverage of a police chase." "Meow," said Horace. The bus went up the hill and down the hill. The children began to whisper. Into the underpass and out of it, the children began to talk. Round the roundabout and up and over the flyover, the children began to yell. "Whee! Please, sir!" to the robber. "I feel sick." "Me too, sir. And me." "Not me, sir. Nor me. I'm never sick." "Silence," growled the robber. But the children were now so noisy they couldn't hear him. "Please, sir, Tracy's got my swimming goggles. Jonathan's got my towel. Brian's eating, sir." "Are we nearly there now?" The robber felt trapped. He put his hands over his ears. This is worse than being in jail, he thought. Meanwhile, Mr. Blotter was smiling. "Please, sir." The noise grew louder still. "Please, sir. He's got my..." "Mr. Robber." "No, I never." "Yes, you did." "That's not fair." "Mr. Robber!" "Stop pushing." Meanwhile, Mr. Robber was unhappy. He looked out into the crowded, peaceful street and "Stop the bus!" he cried. Mr Gaskitt was racing along. He was a worried man. What was Mrs Gaskitt up to? Why was she chasing that bus? Suddenly, the bus stopped. Out jumped the robber, closely followed by Mr Blotter, the driver, and 27 children, all yelling, "Stop him! He's getting away! Tracy's got my hairbrush!" The chase began again. The robber ran into a supermarket and out of it, up an escalator and down an escalator and up, into a lift, up and down and out, into a pizza parlor and out with a stolen pizza. Deep pan, family size, extra pepperoni. The robber was little. The robber was quick. He twisted and turned and ducked and weaved and nearly got away. The children couldn't catch him. The police couldn't catch him. Mrs Gaskitt couldn't catch him. The robber ran out into the car park. "I'll steal a car," he thought. "I'll get away. This pizza's good." Suddenly, there was Mr Gaskitt. "Out of my way," growled the robber. "No," said Mr Gaskitt. "I may be little," growled the robber, "but I'm hard." The robber tried to run around Mr Gaskitt, but Mr Gaskitt was too wide. He tried to punch Mr Gaskitt, but Mr Gaskitt didn't feel a thing. He tripped over his own enormous bag and fell down flat, and Mr Gaskitt sat on him. Moments later, when the police and the children and the Christmas shoppers and Mrs Gaskitt and Gus and Gloria and the TV reporter with her cameraman and sound engineer all arrived, hot and out of breath, there was a flat and captured robber, and there was Mr Gaskitt, cool and calm and eating pizza. Then the police grabbed the robber. Mrs Gaskitt hugged Gus and Gloria. Mr Gaskitt hugged Mrs Gaskitt. Gus and Gloria hugged him. Meanwhile, at his friend's house, live on TV, Horace saw it all. "I know them!" he cried. "No, you don't," said his friend. "Yes, I do! They live in my house!" "No, they don't." "Yes, they do! It's Mr. and Mrs. and Gus and Gloria!" Horace purred with pride. "I'm their cat!" Back in the car park, the police and the TV reporter were asking questions, and Gus and Gloria, mostly, were answering them all. "He's our dad. She's our mum." Mr Blotter was marching the other children back to the bus. The robber was on his way to jail. There was a talk of reward. Suddenly, Mr Gaskitt looked at his watch. "Oh no!" he cried. "Is that the time? I've got to go." Mr Gaskitt kissed his wife and children. "Goodbye, darlings." "Bye-bye, Dad," and hurried off. Mr Gaskitt was driving along. "Soon be there now," he said to himself. He switched on the radio. "Robber gets clean away! Police baffled!" and switched it off again. "I really must get that radio fixed," thought Mr Gaskitt. Mr Gaskitt turned left, drove past an automatic barrier and into a car park. He squeezed out of the car and hurried into a lift. Up went Mr Gaskitt. First floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Mr Gaskitt entered a small room. He grabbed the kettle and made a quick cup of tea. He looked at his watch. What a rush, he thought. Mr Gaskitt got ready. He put on his red working trousers and his red working coat, his red working hat and gloves, his black working boots, his white working whiskers. Ho, 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 cried Mr Gaskitt, and he went to work. Mr Gaskitt sat in his grotto with children on his lap all day long. He was a perfect Santa, kind and comfy, like a big soft bed. At 5:30, Mr Gaskitt came home. He took off his plastic mac, his overcoat, his anorak, his jacket, his 3 scarves, his 2 pairs of gloves. Cup of tea, Dad, said Gloria. He took off his 4 jumpers and a tie, 2 shirts and a pair of trousers. Evening paper, Dad, Gus said. Mr Gaskitt sat in his chair. He drank his tea and read the paper. Father Christmas saves the day, said the headlines. That evening the Gaskitts, all 4 of them, and Horace, watched a sad old movie on TV. They shared the popcorn, wiped their eyes, and waited for the happy ending. Good night. Bye-bye.